and Ruth, right now you're in the UK, is that right?
Yep, in London in the UK. So I can see it's dark in my background already.
Yeah,
So
towards the end of the day.
Dark at 4 p.m. here still. Yeah, so we are in lockdown, so national lockdown. So
right.
Oh, yeah, fun.
Not going anywhere.
That's right. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started, and then we can just go along here. So I just want to welcome everyone to the Rewards Mastermind. So this is a place where we're going to be improving the practices of how we deliver rewards to our clients. And a lot of times we talk about systems that can help us be more efficient and effective in delivering those solutions. And today we're going to be talking about the reward trends for 2021 and how we can use systems to stay on top of those trends. So we'll be talking a lot more about that. But first, I would like to, as always, just make sure that we do quick introductions here. So my name is Sam Reeve. I'm with Comp Team and with Howard, and I'm a performance pay strategist. And Howard specializes in systems. And of course, Howard's comes from a very deep background in financial services, and has worked at companies like Barclays and JP Morgan and so forth. And so a lot of great experience there that he brings, and a lot to talk about on systems as we go through these discussions. Heather Hormel is not with us today. She's couldn't make it, but she's our data and systems expert. She helps with a lot of the implementations and managing the implementation team. So just a little quick introduction. Ruth Thomas, our guest today from Curo. And so Ruth, as we just mentioned, you're currently in the UK. Can you tell us a little bit about how you started Curo, a little bit about your background and so forth?
Yeah, so my background is in global HR and reward management. So I started as an HR generalist, moved into reward probably about 20 years ago, and sort of was working in Asia Pacific very much at that time. Came back to the UK via New York, actually. I did a bit of time in New York, and I worked on a project in the bank that I was working with to look at designing an in-house compensation management solution. And we evaluated the market at the time, and we didn't think there was anything that we wanted to buy externally. So we decided to build our own network-based product. And then not long after that, started to interact with the very beginnings of SaaS HR technology. And we were obviously very scared of it to begin with, because we all didn't want to put our sensitive employee data in the cloud, but mainly through working through flexible benefit implementations, got to see the flexibility, the speed of implementation, and the cost efficiency of SaaS technology. Still didn't really believe there was a comp solution out in the market that I wanted to buy, and so was approached to potentially form a company to deliver a SaaS compensation management tool that would help companies through their complex pay review processes. So I founded the company with Jerry O'Neill, who's our CEO. His background, he'd already founded a FlexBen SaaS technology company called VebNet. He had sold that company, and so we started Curo. So that was about 10 years ago. And brought the compensation management product to the market at that time.
Yeah, so
and more recently, more recently I've been focusing on our pay equity products. So for the last 3 years, we've introduced 2 additional products to our stable, as it were, a gender pay gap reporting tool for the UK to help meet the statutory requirements there. And then my latest baby, or the latest project that we've been working on, is a global pay equity analysis tool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pay equity is a big issue. And I mean, I know that we'll talk about that as far as trends in the US right now. There's pay equity is getting some highlights, especially in Colorado. They just passed a new regulation there this year that's effective January 1. And there's a bit of difference. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was also like the California Fair Pay Act as well. We're helping clients do something, prepare for the reporting that's very similar to the EOC reporting there. Yeah.
So before
Europe is a little bit ahead of us. Yeah.
Yeah. Before we jump into the pay trends, can you tell us a little bit more? Why don't you go ahead and take over the screen, Ruth, and
okay.
then you can show your presentation, but I think that it would be really good to just understand the different pieces that that Curo does. I think you mentioned that you do compensation management. You're in the like slide 3, I think we were talking about.
Yeah. Okay. We'll go from there. So you can see I'm on the right slide now. Yeah.
Yeah,
You
the
see the
different.
slides?
Yes.
Yeah,
Right.
okay, so just our 3 products that we bring to market at Curo. So the compensation management product is the heritage product. That's what we look, it's obviously it's in its 4th version now, from that which we released back in 2010. But it's very much helping organizations manage their compensation review processes. Traditionally, that used to be a once a year process. Many more of our clients are now doing that more frequently, and also now using the compensation management platform live throughout the whole year, in order to do their out of cycle pay adjustments and another activity that they do throughout the whole year.
Mm-hmm.
And then, the gender pay gap tool is really very much a UK focused tool, and it really focuses on compliance with the legislation that came into effect in the UK in 2017. So that's looking at average pay gaps. And then from there, we had many of our clients are global clients. So they might be headquartered in the UK or headquartered in North America, but they're managing a global population. And so some of them were looking at the whole gender pay issue, and realised that to fix your gender pay gap, you needed to implement a lot of D&I tactics, and they didn't want to just do that in one country. They wanted that to be a global agenda. So we had clients saying, well, can we do this on a global basis? And so that's really where we started building the pay equity tool. So we launched that in January officially last year. So it's been out for a year. Increasing number of clients coming onto that platform. It's an analytical product that helps you do statistical modeling, multivariate regression analysis, cohort analysis, equal pay reviews, and average pay reporting.
That's great. And I know that this is quite a different thing in the UK versus the rest of the world. Is, we're looking at the gender pay gap, and then there's pay fairness and pay equity is quite different, right? Yeah.
Yes. So, I mean, traditionally in the UK, the story started around average pay gaps, which, is different from looking at, regression analysis or equal pay in, adjusted pay gap analysis, I guess, in the US context. But increasingly now, people want to look at all aspects of pay equity. So they want to look at average pay gaps, because that tells you a different story from looking at your equal pay gaps, because that average pay gaps will often tell you about moments in your talent life cycle that are vulnerable moments for employees, particularly at hire and progression and pay review time. So when you understand why you have pay gaps in an organization, they can help you diagnose a lot of those root causes. And then obviously, there's the more traditional, like doing an equal pay analysis, checking how people who do like work compare against each other, which is what the pay equity tool does.
Well, show us some of the clients you work with.
Yeah, so we tend to be agnostic in terms of industry. Often we end up sitting where there is complexity in compensation. So we have a lot of clients in professional services and financial services, increasing number of clients in like project management based type companies, so engineering companies, where they have often types of compensation that's split up during the year, and they need to calculate the different types of pay that's been allocated to an employee during the year. But as I said, most of them, a lot of them tend to be multinational companies as well. Our sweet spot tends to be up to around the 20,000 employee company, and that's traditionally where we've sat so far. But we are increasingly, starting to work with larger companies, enterprise-sized some companies beyond that.
Great. So, a little bit about the agenda. Great.
Yeah. So what you've asked me to cover today, Sam and Howard, was really focus on what 2020 brought us in terms of compensation challenges, and then what that's going to lead us to need to think about this year as we start to think, what is our focus going to be for 2021. And then we'll sort of finish up talking about, if you think now is the time for you to actually commit to buying compensation software, what are the things you need to think about? And then I'll also share you a demo of our compensation management platform as well.
Great.
And you're allowing questions and answers as we go along.
That's right. So if there's anybody online that we're broadcasting live on Facebook. If you have some questions there, I might have to get those a little bit later. But if you're on LinkedIn, if you're on the Zoom platform, you can just drop those questions in the chat box there, and then we can answer those as we go. So feel free to jump in. All right. So some of the challenges that we've had in 2020, we've experienced a lot of different things, and it's kind of shook the market, and things that came up. There was I see that you have diversity and inclusion here, pay fairness, remote work, all things that really rose their head in 2020. Could you tell us a little bit more about that, Ruth?
Yes, so I think there can't be any business really that hasn't been through some form of uncertainty. Definitely, there were winners and losers out of everything that the pandemic brought us and continues to bring us. And most businesses, transformed or are in the process of transforming. And if you think what that means for reward, well, if your reward strategy is heading in the right direction, it needs to be inextricably linked to your business priorities.
Mm-hmm.
And there can't be many businesses whose priorities haven't changed. So really, we do have to start thinking about reviewing some of those legacy compensation programs. Many of them have been around for over 10 years. We haven't really changed often how we've administered merit reviews. Incentive plans maybe have been with us, for probably 5 years. So I think, what we did learn is that we could adapt quickly. We saw that last year. We had to, in that initial response phase of the crisis, respond very quickly. And so I think, if you haven't already, it's thinking about how you review compensation plans going forward and whether they will support you as your business transforms. And I think there's also an element of resilience. The resilience was a big word last year. How do we build resilience into our businesses? I think we also need to think about how we build resilience into our compensation programs. So are they adaptable? Are they flexible? We saw, and I'm sure you guys had, issues over helping clients review compensation incentive plan metrics that were just no longer relevant because of what happened to, companies during last year.
Right. Do you have some examples? The big part of the shutdown, or the first part, was right in the March timeframe, where a lot of companies are doing their pay reviews and so forth. How did some of those companies react in your environment? Did they have some certain challenges that they dealt with?
Well, it's interesting. We were just starting to implement a piece of code fix in our compensation management product that allowed for negative pay increases, because we'd never been asked to do negative pay increases before. And that was actually for a implementation happening in Japan, where that was becoming a more common occurrence. And what we actually did when the immediate part of the crisis in March is we went out to our clients and we said, what do you think are going to be the challenges that are going to be facing you this year, particularly as you get to the compensation review process, and how can we help you, and what do we need to do to the product now? So pay freezes, obviously, pay reductions. So we built all that functionality into our tool. I think there was a lot of thinking at the same time, trying to get pay into the hands of the right people that really needed it at the time. So critical key workers, thinking out changing. Jobs changed into hazardous jobs that would never have been deemed hazardous. If you think about a company like Peloton, which obviously been one of the big winners out of last year, the number that you've seen their revenues massively increase, but the people that were actually going into people's houses to install the Peloton bikes were suddenly being paid hazard pay, something that you would never have thought you'd probably going to have to do for them in the past. So it was a very rapid response during that time.
Mm-hmm. And then also there's, due to last year, a lot of companies have had uncertainty in their budgets and how much they can spend towards not only compensation, but if they were planning on implementing a system, they had to rethink that and so forth. So what are the, as in your topic of cost constraints here, what are some of the pieces that you would say that, maybe we should invest in a system or invest in a different process that's going to help us in the long run?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest, we run regular webinars at Curo, and one of the questions that kept coming up was, how are we going to manage the merit review next year? Because we're going to have no or very limited budget. How are we going to engage employees? How are we going to retain employees? How are we going to attract employees? And I think, when you read, I think one of the things we really need to think about is really looking at what elements of the reward package employees value the most. So when we responded to the last financial crisis back in the sort of 2008, 2009, what we tended to see was these peanut butter approaches to applying merit reviews. Everybody got 1%, everybody got 2%, everybody got 3%. And I think this time we need a more innovative approach going into 2021. So, we're working with clients, I'm sure you are too, where we're saying really look across the whole employee value proposition and everything that you offer to your employees, and listen to your employees about what they value the most. And if you think about the context of last year, a lot of people took pay freezes, a lot of people took pay cuts, and they had to be voluntary because you can't contractually in the UK force a pay cut on someone. But what they did value were the other types of benefits. They valued, well-being benefits. They valued the fact that you were helping them with their childcare. They valued the fact that you were helping them set up their office environment at home. And I think that's really very much, what we need to do going into 2021, be more creative. And in terms of justifying solution purchases, on the pay equity side, our pay equity products, we did see a lot of people say, that's going to drop off the agenda this year. We've got too much going on. And then after June and the Black Lives Matters and the social justice movement there, we actually started to see people coming back to us saying it's the employees now asking us for this information. And so we now need to do, those numbers and start crunching our pay equity numbers. So we've seen a big uptick there. And I think, we are seeing companies who do genuinely want to transform their processes. They are having to do more with less. And one way of doing that is investing in technology. And we'll talk about, building the right business case for that. It will be more difficult to get sign off for discretionary spend. But, if you can show how it will ultimately enhance your overall reward offering, then, you're on the right journey.
Right, and lots to talk about there. But first, you mentioned diversity and inclusion. So where is pay going in 2021 as reflects to diversity and inclusion?
Well, we've seen quite a few commentators declaring, 2021 is going to be the year of DE&I or DEI&B. And I think, everything that happened last year, what we did see, whilst the pandemic was a great leveler, it also laid bare a lot of the inequity that pervades our societies and our workplaces. And we saw how people in minority groups and also low income earners were most impacted and continuing to be impacted, by the loss of income and income stability and unemployment. And so I think, you can't help but have noticed that, whether you're an employee within a company, whether you're a consumer, and looking at what the companies that you buy products from are doing, and whether you're an investor in a company. And so there's a lot more demand for what are we going to do about addressing pay fairness and also, addressing the DE&I agenda. And then at the same time, just before the pandemic hit, we started to see this emergence from a corporate perspective of the multi-stakeholder approach and the purpose of an organization. So, and that the purpose of an organization was no longer just about profit, that it needed to be about, how it interacted with society, how it interacted with the environment, and overall, or how it impacted the world that it lived in. And so we're starting to see that come through in regulations, the recent SEC regulations around human capital metric reporting. So I think, what a company reports will be required to report more transparently about what it does about pay fairness and also about its diversity metrics and how it addresses DE&I. So I think it's going to become a big story of this year of how we respond as employers to that.
Right. Yeah. So in the past, there's. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Howard.
No, go ahead, Sam.
No, I was just about to. I was about to say that pay fairness and in the past was really focused around, base pay and so forth. And now we're hearing more about the other elements of benefits, making sure that people are in those same comparable groups have the same types of benefits that they're eligible for, long-term incentives, and even going around communication around opportunities. I know the Colorado Equal Pay Act that was coming into play in the 1st of January here, talks about communication elements such as awareness when there's been a promotion or a job change that's potentially available. How we put things on job descriptions, things like this. And so seeing a lot of that. Is that happening in other parts of the world as well, Ruth?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what people were initially doing around pay fairness was legislation driven. We started to see pay equity legislation emerging in about 2016 in Europe, mainly Iceland. We're the innovator there. So that has been driving some of the awareness, but I think it's been the social justice movements that have really broadened that conversation beyond pay. It's interesting. We're doing a webinar at the end of this month where we're really going to look at how you can align your reward strategy with your DE&I strategy across the whole reward portfolio. So obviously there's pay equity, but how can you deliver a diverse set of benefits, and how do you deliver benefits that foster inclusion? So I think that is something that we're all going to have to try and start to understand as reward practitioners this year, and start to build towards that.
Oh, that's great. So can you tell us a little bit more about the date of that webinar that is coming up?
I think it's the 27th of January. I'll send you the details so you can share with your audience. But yeah, the 27th of January, and it will be a panel interview. So we'll have benefits and D&I expert from the US, and then one from the UK joining me, and we'll be talking about those challenges.
Well, another factor here. Oh, sorry, keep on interrupting.
No, I just had a question because we kind of skipped over it, but the working has brought up a number of issues for companies in terms of how do we structure pay now that people can be working from any which area, some much lower cost than headquarters, and that has been a source of constant debate here in the States. I'm just curious as to whether that, what you've seen, especially from an international perspective on that issue, because really, employees can decide to work in any country they want as long as they're able to connect.
Yeah, that's a moving feat at the moment. I think it's one of the big questions that seem to be going around. If you look at any of the comp chat rooms, what do we do about geo pay or regional pay? I mean, you saw people like Facebook, who were one of the first companies to make the commitment to, more or less permanent remote working. And they were one of the first ones to come out to say, we're going down this journey. And this was like in May or June last year, and we're going to adjust pay. Subsequently, there's a lot of people who haven't decided whether they're fully committed to remote working or not. I think a lot, and so they're still hedging their bets, trying to decide what's the right thing to do. And because we don't really know half the time with the pandemic, and how each government is responding, it's quite hard to say, well, we're going to plan ahead, because suddenly it's another 3 months that people are going to have to work at home. So I think people are still watching this, trying to decide when is the right time to adjust people's pay. Then you've got other companies like HubSpot, who again have made their decision. They're creating a hybrid workforce. So they have their in the office employees, their at home employees, and their hybrid employees, and they're redefining their reward packages for those different types of employees. So if you're no longer working in the office, you don't need a season ticket or a train ticket loan, in order to get to work anymore. But you might want increased bandwidth, so you might want benefits to go towards paying increased bandwidth in your wherever you're working. I think if you read some of the commentators, they'll say what's going to happen with pay, that we may, particularly in the US where regional pay is a bigger issue because you've got such a large country, so there are more regional divergences, is that it may gravitate towards national averages. I don't know, is that what you're sort of seeing people say?
We are hearing a lot of that. Yes.
Yeah. And then there's the interesting ethical debate about, should it matter where you're working? If you're providing the same value to a company,
right?
Why does it matter where you're working? If we're talking about pay fairness here, I've got a skill set and I'm delivering a certain element of value to you as a company, why does it matter where I am? So I think it's
Sure.
going to be an interesting one. You know, for some companies, they're still deciding where they're going to land in terms of, are they going to let remote working stay? Are they going to have a hybrid workforce? And I think they'll evolve their plans around that this year.
Yeah, I think the other piece is the emergence of telework. I mean, we've heard that you know, of course, telemedicine has been grown substantially this year, and there's those businesses that are traditionally in malls or may not have the traffic as they have in the past. I mean, some of those positions could potentially move to an online platform and so forth. So it's great to see the emergence of telework, and as far as that goes.
Yeah. So
I think flexibility is going to be key,
yes.
and adaptability in this year.
Yep, I think that's part of the resilience. You know, we've got to be more flexible, more adaptable. Change, you know, compensation programs are often hard to change because they, you know, they tend to get embedded, and they're often linked to an annual financial cycle, and we're not always very speedy at changing them. But I do think we need to think about all these challenges. You know, there are other challenges out there that, you know, we could go into, which I won't. You know, skills-based pay, is that going to happen? More personalized pay, I think we definitely will see that emerge this year. I think skills-based pay is maybe further on the horizon, but definitely thinking, you know, about personalized reward, and how that plays out. I mean, we've talked a bit about it with the hybrid workers, but
yeah, so I'd be really interested in see how your platform helps with those particular elements. And so, and especially as we talk about diversity and inclusion and pay fairness, I mean, I'd like to see those aspects in your platform.
Okay. Yeah.
But right now, is how can companies, you know, that right now there some are burdened with doing pay on spreadsheets and trying to do this pay analysis or fair pay analysis on a spreadsheet and doing regression there, and it's quite cumbersome. And so, how can a business make a business case to purchase software? What's the best way that they can do that?
Okay. Yeah. So I've got some tips on that. I've got one slide here, obviously. I mean, I'm sure many of your listeners would have heard of Josh Bersin, one of my favorite commentators on the HR technology market. But, you know, he talks about the big reset, and that's where we're at. You know, if we think about going into 2021, it is about resetting. And he, you know, was very much focused on what we needed to do in HR to do that. And it is about shedding our administrative history. We've got to be more efficient. We've got to automate and reskill ourselves. And so, you know, he was a big proponent, obviously, of HR technology and saying, you know, this was the way out of this. So I hope, you know, that many of your listeners are, you know, thinking about that in terms of needing to potentially consider technology now more than ever to help them do less with more, or more with less, sorry, rather than less with more. So I've got a few tips that we typically, you know, help our clients with in terms of if you're going to think about buying compensation software. So we can maybe just run through those quickly. I think obviously the first thing is really understanding what the benefits are going to be to you of implementing the technology, thinking about how the technology will really enhance your business needs. So how is it aligned to your business needs, and thinking about a real return on investment. Quite often, you know, it's difficult to get sign off for this spend. You might go at it from the point of arguing how it's going to make your life easier in reward, but obviously those signing off the check don't really care about that half. You know, what they really care about is what business benefits is it going to bring. So I think, you know, we need to maybe learn a few lessons from our friends in finance and build a proper business case and articulate the returns accordingly. I know that's work that you get involved with your clients.
Yeah, that's a big piece. Is a lot of clients they don't know where to start. I mean, there's so many software providers, and their needs are diverse. You know, they have everybody does compensation a little bit differently if they're looking for a compensation plan. And so, and the first piece, and I think you're going to talk about, Ruth, as being very important, is to get those requirements together. I mean, how do they do comp? I mean, what are the rules that they follow and their process that they follow for their company? because basically when they select a vendor, they don't want to change everything to fit the realm of the software. They want to disrupt the business. So that's one piece that Howard leads is ensuring that companies know exactly what they need so that they can find the best vendor out there. So yeah, very much so.
Yeah, and I mean, benefits are quite broad. These are the ones that typically, our customers say they gain when we do our post-implementation reviews with them. So when you're building your business case, think about these touch points. Often the argument is around efficiency, but it's often from a strategic perspective, improving that line of sight between what your employees achieve and business outcomes, and making sure that managers see that so that they can allocate comp according to that. We've talked about the importance of pay equity. Using a solution can ensure decisions are less subjective, and you're providing all the information to make fair and informed pay decisions. One of the most common sort of fears that I hear from HR is, that they don't think managers are equipped to do pay reviews. They don't trust them to do pay reviews. And what you get with the solution is this ability to build in checks and balances, to build in compliance with alerts. And I can show you some of that when we do a quick demo of the Curo platform. So you can make sure that your managers are free to make decisions, but they're doing that within the remit of your reward principles and guidelines.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. You mentioning that a lot of companies have that fear of their managers are not ready to make those decisions and so forth, and so they always keep pay at a really high level. But there's got to be a way, and these systems really help with that. Is driving the process down and putting constraints and so forth on the process so that managers can make recommendations within ranges that are appropriate and have more guidance from their HR staff, and have the oversight and governance from management as they go along. So.
And I think that's, a best of breed compensation management solution normally has more flexibility in applying those alerts. So our alert functionality is built using decision trees. So, you're not building a complex piece of code. You can create a decision tree, which means that you can actually have an alert that applies to an individual employee, because you can take a decision tree down to say, if employee ID equals blah, do this. And so we'll have quite complex alerts built in, because they will apply to different population groups and different levels and different types of employees, that that just is happening behind the scenes, and so the managers are just automatically prompted to do the right thing.
And that saves a fair amount of time as well, in terms of having HR, either the generalists or the compensation people, review recommendations and make sure they're adhering to the firm's policies. At a higher level, after the numbers have been submitted, this can be done right up front. So it's a great efficiency, in terms of efficiency. The other thing that we often hear. No, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Howard.
I was saying the other thing that we often hear is the concern about submitting data to the cloud, and the concern, but yet firms seem perfectly fine sending out all these spreadsheets using passwords that are probably 10 years old that everyone knows all over the place, and having to sit on laptops and mobile phone devices, and it's like they aren't really realizing the security risk that they're imposing.
Yeah, and I think that's been highlighted. That was been highlighted by this remote working trend that we've seen. That was one of the big. We had quite a few clients who that was one of the things they wanted to reassess before they committed to using the solution this year end was, just checking the data security and making sure that you've got people remotely everywhere accessing this sensitive data, and they want, so doing it through a cloud solution is obviously you get all that security embedded.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, managing this risk is a huge issue. Howard, we've had discussions around this just in comp professionals out there customizing spreadsheets and so forth. It's as you know, when we're talking about the requirements, I mean, pay requirements are quite extensive, and just programming this into a spreadsheet can lead to some errors, simple errors that can have devastating consequences. So it's great to have a system to avoid that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you talked about requirements. It's often the most overlooked phase, during the selection process for any software, and HR software particularly. And I think you need to really know your requirements. It can be a very time-consuming part of the process, but it will set you up for success, because it will help you to properly evaluate the vendors. Because you know what you're looking for and you know what you're looking for them to do, and then it will help you evaluate whether you've been successful. So when you look back, once the software has been implemented, you can say, well, is it doing what we said we wanted it to do at the start? So it is an important part of the process, and it will ultimately mean that you will save money and you will save time if you have done that step in the process first. And I think it's important.
Firms fear, I think firms fear the amount of time this stage takes, but as you said, this sort of lays the foundation of what you're going to build. It's like when you think about building a house, you don't want to rush the foundation and then build something up that's going to collapse. So the time spent here is very much needed and determines the rest of the process.
Yeah, and what's really interesting here is that a lot of companies will go into the process, so they'll get software, and then they'll think about, well, how do we actually do this? And then they'll lay out the requirements, which extends the implementation time and could threaten their timeline, right? And so really the important thing is to have this done before they go out and look for a provider, so that they are ready.
Yeah, and it's compensation systems particularly are there's always a tight time frame, because you tend to be doing this selection process in between two cycles. So you kind of say, you've got 6 to 7 months window potentially, and there's quite a lot to get done. So you're defining your requirements, then selecting vendors, then always remember about all the other things that you've got to go through, like technical evaluation and contractual negotiation. So but it will ultimately, if you do this, it will set you up for success, defining your requirements.
Right.
Another important thing that's often overlooked is engaging all stakeholders, we find. So the decisions, tend to often be made within the HR department. Maybe you've involved procurement and IT, and you had sign off from your execs. But when we think about our solutions and how they touch the different stakeholders in the organization, it's good to define that up front as well, and ask your stakeholders, what do they want from a solution? That can stop the difficult conversations you have with managers when you go to roll out your system and they go, well, we never asked for this. We've quite often seen that happen. Whereas if you've asked them what they want and you deliver it, then you're not going to get into that that type of conversation.
Right. And the other piece is that a lot of companies are out there, they're busy doing their business, right? I mean, their managers are engaged, and it's when we include in stakeholders from different areas, we have better buy-in, right?
Yeah.
And to ensure that goes smoothly. And also, just on the same line, it's important to have a system that's pretty intuitive, so that we don't have to spend a lot of time in training and so forth. So it's having good people select and be involved in the implementation process can help with that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, we found getting someone from finance and someone from technology, and then whole vendor review process expedites the whole thing, versus HR and some other folks pushing it forward and then finding out that you're running into other issues that no one surfaced earlier.
Yeah, I think we're seeing more of that now, because more processes go to an RFP process now, where you do get procurement and other stakeholders involved.
Right.
So organizational readiness, this is about being realistic. I mentioned it earlier about implementation timelines, making sure that you've got time. You need a good project plan. You don't want to be testing the system in the last 2 weeks before you're about to go live with your pay review, because you've just got too many competing priorities, and you're just setting yourself up, for failure. So, really think about all the activities that you need to do through the implementation process. And the other part of organizational readiness is around data. You can't talk about system implementation without talking about data. One of the quirks of a compensation management solution is it tends to get data from different inputs. So you've got your people data coming from your HRIS or your payroll system. You'll have potentially finance data coming in, performance data, market data. So it's good to get a data checklist out there of all the data that you think you might need, and then have a clear idea about how ready that data is going to be for your implementation process.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a big portion big part that Howard and I have realized, especially Heather, that's not here today, is the importance of having the data ready for these systems. I mean, if you're missing the employee IDs or job codes and things like that, some companies don't even have those in place, and it can make an implementation like this quite difficult. So yeah, very important to have that.
And then, if you've put all those previous steps in place, doing a thorough vendor assessment will be a lot easier. So, you have to bear in mind that a lot of the time, if you're putting out an RFP, they will be gamed by vendors. So if you put out an RFP with 100 questions in, most people answering those will just tick the yes box. So if you've defined your requirements, it's very easy for them to say, yes, we can do that. So when you get to the software demo stage, where you get to actually see the product, it's making sure that you get the vendor to demonstrate the requirements that you've laid out, and come up with good use cases during that time. Give them a set of use cases that you want them to show you how it will work for you in your environment, and that will make sure that you don't end up picking a solution that you're going to have to change your processes to fit into.
Mm-hmm. Right.
We quite often see that we're obviously a best of breed compensation solution provider. We often find that there's a lot of pressure potentially coming from a internal project to move to a big, HR IS platform. Or to, and they're kind of being forced to take the comp module. And if you haven't defined your requirements, you can't fight back. You can't say, no, that's not going to work for me. And often the comp module in that context is being sold for free anyway. So they're kind of being told, just take this free module, whereas if you've set out your requirements, done a thorough vendor assessment, you'll be able to, stop that happening. Right?
We find that's one of the most difficult challenges is when a firm has moved to a big platform and it was supposed to be the be-all and end-all solution to all of the HR needs. And then the compensation people say, this doesn't work for us. And then they're back to spreadsheets, and then trying to justify after this big spend why something more tailored is needed.
Yeah, and we have, quite a few of our clients, long time clients now are ones that we were a 2-year interim solution, whilst they rolled out a large platform, and they're still with us, like 5 or 6 years on, because when they actually went to implement the comp module, they just realized it wouldn't be able to do the same kind of things.
So Ruth, at this point, let me take over the screen really quick, and before we launch into going through a demo, and what I'm going to do right now is just put up a quick poll, and so that if anybody wants to learn more about this and doesn't have time to spend on the demo right here, they can just sign up for this, and we'll make sure that you can have a demo and some time with Ruth, or if you'd like to have more time with Howard and myself or Heather, feel free to sign up. And so that polling is launched now, so you can have that. But before we go into before we go into the demo, I just have a few more questions I want to just bring up. So we talked about a couple areas of what Curo helps with. One is a compensation management piece, and so a lot of companies out there are, they're wondering, when should I consider a compensation management solution? given that, that I'm, maybe a small company, or as I'm growing, or we're planning on growing to more 500,000, whatever. So when do you typically see companies start thinking about a system and having that in place?
Well, unfortunately for us, there's not a direct relationship between the size of the company and the complexity of compensation. So, we have some small companies under 500 that we work with, but because they have quite complex compensation, particularly incentive plans. But normally the tipping point is around the 1,000 employee mark that we see, where it starts to become more, the ROI on investing in technology starts to become more effective. And then particularly if you're doing that across multiple population groups, where you've got different schemes that you're needing to administer with different plan rules.
Yeah,
I think you're spot on though with the thing about it's not really directly related to the company size, because I've seen smaller companies that have so many different complex plans, and they have spreadsheets that go out to the gazillion column, and it's just incredible, and they're like relishing the thought of moving to an automated solution and getting rid of those horrible spreadsheets.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Another thing is that some firms, they'll have, maybe they have a dominant amount of their population is in the United States, and maybe they have a sprinkling of people in different countries. Is there a lot of times during when they're handling this on spreadsheets, they kind of handle that in a different realm. So is there any best practices that you would have for companies that have just a sprinkling of people in other countries?
Yeah, I mean, quite often you don't have to implement everybody from day one on a solution. So in that particular example, where they don't necessarily know the requirements, or the processes are quite small in some of the sprinkling countries that you mentioned, then the priority is really to just implement the system for the main hubs, or the main hub centers in year one, and then bring other people on in time. So we see that quite commonly as don't think that you've got to implement everybody on the solution in year one. You'll often get to the end goal quicker if you do that with different groups of people over time.
Right. On the other side of I know that you also focus on the fair pay and diversity and inclusion. So when a company comes and says, well, some of these systems are expensive, when does it make sense for us? How do you typically respond to that?
So on pay equity, well, I think if you sit back and you evaluate the exposure from a financial perspective that you can have by not having fair pay, and I can't remember I don't have to my fingertips, what the average litigation cost is involved in an equal pay claim. So I think when you look at most solutions, so the pay equity technology that's coming into the market is really coming in to help organizations who want to do this on a more frequent basis. The typical approach to doing a pay equity analysis has been to go with a large consulting firm. To pay a consultant can cost you $100,000 per annum, to have a pay equity audit done. And that's a cost that organizations are saying they don't want to have to pay all the time, and they want to have more control over this. So, software in that context versus what you might be paying in annual consulting fees is much more competitive.
So when are the first steps that if we look at a company getting ready to use your software for fair pay and equal pay and so forth? Should there be some steps that they should consider before they put their data into the software?
Yes. We work with our clients through a kickoff phase to help them identify the things that they need to go through. But the first most important step is considering the legal implications, particularly in the US context of deciding whether you're going to establish legal privilege over any pay equity analysis that you do. And then also just considering all the legal implications of the analysis and the data that you're going to gather. If you're going to do a global pay equity audit, you might say, right, I want to understand how race and ethnicity plays out globally. But in some countries around the world, it's not legal to capture that data, or it's not legal to record that data. So, I think the first step is always understanding the legal parameters within which you're going to have to work.
Okay. What about, when we're thinking about fair pay as well, there's if we're thinking about an annual analysis and looking at that, that might be one thing. But then there's some companies have a large amount of hourly workers or seasonal workers that come on during a certain period of time, or it can fluctuate due to turnover. How should they handle an analysis in that environment?
I mean, and that's what we're trying to do with, the technology, is to allow you to rerun the analysis whenever there's a significant business event. So, running pay equity analysis once a year isn't enough if you think about the pace at which our businesses are now changing. So it may be that you're going through an acquisition process. Maybe you've been through a business reorganization, and you need to reevaluate where people sit against each other from a pay fairness perspective. So this is really becoming something that people want to do much more frequently. The customers that we've onboarded onto the platform, they tend to settle into a quarterly analysis process.
Mm-hmm.
So they're running they do their big pay equity analysis probably just before the compensation review process, so they can take any pay equity adjustments into that process, and then they like to run that sort of quarterly thereafter.
So in the past, with some companies who are doing their fair pay analysis for the first time, it can take them up to 3 months just to do it for the first time. Now you're saying that a lot of companies are doing it throughout the year. So once you have everything into the system like this, how fast can you do an analysis?
Well, in our solution, pay equity solution, you just upload a data set, and then the analytics are refreshed automatically. And then, you probably need another week to work through, running statistical analysis and running your cohort analysis. So it's a lot faster than, a 3-month process, because you've already set up all the parameters of understanding what you're looking for.
So you're saying is once you get this set up, I mean, it could potentially take 2 weeks to really do a refresh.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, I'd love to jump in and take a look at the demo. Can we go ahead and launch that?
Yeah, so I'm going to look at the compensation management product. So let's share my screen. Get rid of, just share that and take you to the right place. Sorry, there we go. Right. Okay, hopefully you can see a login screen now.
Yes.
So the product I'm going to focus on now for the next sort of 5 to 10 minutes is our compensation management platform. So this is helping organizations to run their compensation reviews, covering salary, covering incentive pay, covering LTIPs, and producing communications for employees. So we work with over 300 companies globally who are using this platform to administer their review processes. And I'm going to show you, first of all, so the typical users are HR and reward users, and then your line managers who are actually going to be making the compensation recommendations. I'm going to start with their view first. So I'm going to log in as a compensation manager. And one of the things you need to think about when you're selecting a compensation solution is, if you are only running your cycle once a year, this has to be a system that they can remember how to use. It needs to be user intuitive, and they need to be able to find what they need to do quite easily. So, we don't have many screens in our platform. There's literally, this is your kind of dashboard screen as the manager. And on this screen, you can access, you can put tailorable welcome messages. You can see all the key dates in the process, so you can set those up for your users. You can put in, I'll talk a bit more about how we use business analytics in the product, but you can attach key documents. So this is kind of their key navigation page from where they can find probably everything they need to do with the process. And this is where they can then obviously go into action reviews. So we're looking at a global manager who's got a number of reviews in play. So our product can manage multiple different populations, consecutive reviews. Nothing has to be happening all at the same time. and they can easily see the status of any of the reviews that they're involved in. So this manager here can see there are managers beneath him waiting to submit. He can see how much of the budget pool has been spent so far, and then just literally go in to see that review process. And this is really the next screen where managers have to action things. And this is the review screen, designed principally to look a bit like an Excel spreadsheet. But we have all the basically employee data. This is all configured for each client, so no review grid. It's not out the box. The client will design, with our implementation consultants, how they want the review grid to look. But there's obviously critical information that you will share. So obviously pay data. Normally, when we're talking about pay fairness and benchmarking, there'll be different ways of presenting either market data, salary range data, how your employees compare to their peers. And we provide different ways that that can be provided. So here we're showing actually market data. Excuse me.
Yeah, I like that, how it's a quick look with these bars on where a person is placed within compared to the market target. So it's a really easy indicator. It's great.
Yeah, and from a manager's perspective, if you then want to immediately focus on, for example, we have a filter bar that allows you to filter on any of the columns in the spreadsheet. So, if you want to go in and the first thing you want to say is, okay, let's look at who the people are below market, who are my exceptional performers, and I want to apply that filter to the grid. I can immediately see, who the red shaded people probably, who are the people I really need to think about allocating my compensation budget to first. So it's easy for managers to isolate populations and, focus on the people that, the right reward going to the right people, I guess. So.
Mm-hmm.
Now for many organizations, when we talk about salary reviews, merit reviews, it's been focused on performance reviews. But probably 3 years ago, we started working with clients who wanted to broaden the view in terms of what was driving base pay changes. So we have the ability to use multiple talent metrics. So you might use performance, but you might also use, say, your 9-box grid if you're still using one. You might use, for example, your attrition risk. So you can use different talent ratings. These are just examples in the product, which will ultimately drive any guideline recommendations. So it's not just based on performance rating.
Mm-hmm.
So you can show managers lots of different guideline recommendations. And then when we were talking about the benefits of the system, we talked about, guiding managers through the review process. And this is where all our alert functionality can come into play. So here I've tried to give an employee a 20% increase, and I'm getting a block there. This is a hard stop saying, nope, you can't do that. If you want to do that, you're going to have to go off and, speak to your HRBP. And then you might have, more soft warnings. So, these will again be tailorable to the client and to the population requirements. But there's all this guidance that will pop up whenever a manager is entering something into these boxes. And that's the, the compliance factor of the solution.
Mm-hmm. I like the color coding there in showing that, and it's really clear that you've put in something that's either beyond the guidelines or something that should be considered more.
Yeah,
need to have more help.
If you're a manager coming into this and a number of managers are submitted to you, then you can just filter on all the ones that are errors as well, or those that are warnings. So you just, if you've had all of your recommendations submitted to you, you probably just want to look at all the ones that have these orange warnings here to say, well, why have they gone beyond the initial guidelines?
And these are flexible, right? They can either be a hard stop where you can't submit, or just a warning. Right.
Yes, exactly. And when I was explaining before, they can be very specific. So you could actually end up with an alert for a single employee if you wanted to. We don't always recommend it, particularly for a large organization, but we have the capability to really hone in those alerts down to very specific populations. Key component, we talked about cost constraints, is managing to budget. So we display that in the budget panel at the bottom of the screen here. And you can build budgets in different ways. So we can build budgets either, rule-based budgets. So you're saying it's a certain percentage, based on where you are and what business group you're in, or it can be top-down budgets, which we get more with incentive pay. So there's an overall pot that the manager can then push down to the recommending managers beneath him. And budget pots can be segmented. So you could isolate, for example, country budgets. That's optional. Or you could have, functional budget pots that are isolated so that they will be ring fenced in terms of how the manager spends that money. Mm-hmm. And they can go in here and edit this. So if I'm the manager, I can go in and I can look at my allocation, and then I can look at the managers beneath me, and I can go in and reallocate budget to those managers. So I've got the power as the manager user to be able to adjust budgets through the process.
Great.
And then other functionality, that users have, kind of all the user intuitive stuff. They've got the ability to tailor their view within the review grid, so they can hide columns and that will be saved. Their user preferences will be saved. And we're obviously a multi-currency solution. I've talked about how we work with global companies. So you can set the currency at the review level. So quite often systems will require you to set the currency at the system level. But if you want to run a review in euros in your German office, you can run that review in euros, but run the rest of your, global review in dollars. So it's, we've got the flexibility to have FX rates apply at different review levels.
Right. We talked about how a lot of companies, their concerns is that they don't think their managers are ready for this, and a lot of the functionality of showing the guidelines and so forth have alleviated a lot of that. But what about the part of communication, and improving the communication aspect?
Yeah, so one way of improving how you share information with the manager is obviously through the solution, making sure you've got the key information on the grid, but we can also share additional data with managers through these view cards, we call them. So you can import lots of different data and share that with your managers, and they can review that here. So, obviously an important thing to know is the pay history of an employee as they progress through the organization, because that may impact your data. You can drill down in more detail into benchmark data, and we have different visuals that can support that, and a compensation history for each employee. Again, all of those are tailorable to the employee. But do you mean the communication to employees, Sam, at the end of the process?
Also in that as well, yes.
Yeah, so we also manage, if I come out of the review grid, you can see we've got letters here. So the key part of the process, sort of the end of the process, is where we actually create and deliver letters. So now our clients can create the letters in their, themselves within our platform. So the reward teams will create the letters. So this is at the end of the review phase where you're wanting to recommend, communicate letters to employees. So through the solution, you can set up different review templates. So we've got different examples in here. So this is more of a total reward statement. Again, all configured to your requirements. If we look at a typical salary review letter, this might be what you send out to your employees. You've got the option as the manager, you can go in and add a personalization comments. We quite often get asked that, we've got a generic letter, but the manager wants to add a final comment on the end of the letter. So we've now got that ability in the system where they can add that letter personalization.
Very nice.
And then, as the manager, you can obviously download these letters if you want to just give them physically to the employee, or you can email them to the employee. And it will go directly, it will be secure PDF'd to the employee's email. And we obviously ask managers to ensure best practice to say, yes, you've actually spoken to the employee before you then, send this letter to the employee. So that's how we manage the communication process.
Right. And also it seems, does this system, I mean, we talked about the two systems, your equal pay and analysis and this system, they talk together, these two systems?
Yes. So, I mean, fair pay has always been an important part of our whole product portfolio. And increasingly, we're asked to put in analytics into the product to help managers to make sure that they're staying, true to the delivery of fair pay. So we do get, these are examples of sort of like a diversity dashboard that we can have live over a review. So these are live dashboards that will reflect, real-time data entry by the managers. So we can have a look at, for example, how gender distribution plays out in performance rating allocation, or gender distribution by pay band. We can look at things like gender pay gaps or average salary increases. So all of those can be delivered, through the dashboard to managers. And the idea of that is you kind of want managers to make decisions, before they submit them, to Howard's point earlier. So you're not having to go through an extensive moderation phase. You want the managers to be able to see the impact of their decisions as they're actually making them. So we tackle that there. And on the review grid, we can take the data out of the pay equity system. And we can put in any recommended pay equity adjustments. I don't have that set up in this demo, but you can isolate a pay budget that is purely for pay equity adjustments. So you could have a merit review where you've got a budget for merit, a budget for promotion, and a budget for pay equity adjustments. And those can be allocated throughout the review process.
Okay, we do have a question from Susan. She's asking if this tool is connected to those survey sources that they
were showing in the review grid. Yeah, so it's not a direct link. The client will provide the survey data, and then they will be uploaded into the solution. So it's not a live link. We do have some partners who are market data providers, and so we do have an automated interface between their solutions and ours. But really, it's up to the client what market data they want to upload.
Mm-hmm. So is this system meant to be a real-time system all year round, or do you use this at particular times throughout the year?
So I think I mentioned earlier on, traditionally it used to be that people were doing their annual salary or annual pay review process on this. Now we tend to get people doing more mid-year reviews. Potentially they're doing reviews for different populations at different times of the year. And now we have what we call rolling reviews, which I don't think I've got one set up on here. No, I haven't got one set up on here. So a rolling review means that you can have the system available all year round, and it's basically managing out of cycle reviews, and that can be linked to a payroll cutoff. So you can launch a monthly review or a fortnightly review, and managers can input recommendations, and then those can be managed through the payroll process. So we would just take an extract out of here into the payroll system, and that could be an automated feed if necessary.
Yeah, and that's another question as far as the different systems that this integrates with, in either HRIS or payroll. And does it integrate with all systems or certain systems?
Yeah, so I mean, our clients use a complete, breadth of different platforms. Some of them we have APIs built with, so we have a growing API library. It's often one of the first questions people ask is, do you have an API? But when they actually get to implement the comp system, they actually don't want to have live data coming in, because if you think about how you normally manage data during a compensation review window, say of 2 weeks, there are certain data that you don't want to have updated. But we do have the capability for APIs. We have some professional service clients who have like 6 to 8 week review windows. So they definitely, they're larger organizations, 15,000 people, and they want the data refreshed, during the review phase. So there is the opportunity to have that, yes.
Okay, so the API is automated.
I have a question. Oh, go.
Yeah, so the API is the.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Howard.
No, I was going to ask. In addition to the standard reports that you provide, how flexible is the system in terms of running ad hoc reports, or do you need to just download to Excel?
Yep, I can show you that. So if I just change my login view, I'm just going to log in as like a reward or HR user. And I can show you how we can build what we call data extracts. So you've seen the, in the reporting icon here, we've looked at those analytical reports, but you can also build data extracts very easily. So slightly different homepage here. This is the reward user. This is where they can see everything that's going on with a review. Any of the reviews, they can see the, the status of the review flow, how many alerts and things are, running on a particular review, and quite a few different menu options here. So one of the things they can do is basically build ad hoc reports. So if we go to build a data extract, You can say whether you want it to be just a point in time report, choose a review that you're going to run this over, and then continue, and you get a report building screen. And this is where you can literally just choose from all the data fields that you've uploaded, and you can add those to this report. So first of all, probably want to look at adding the person's name. So I'm going to add name, surname into there. Add that, drop that in. It's not going to let me drop that in. And then salary, I can search for salary and add that in. And then you can continue to build your report up, and then you can save that extract. So you can obviously give it a title. You can permission that to different users. So you could permission it to a user profile, and then they can, use that extract. And then you can obviously export that extract down to CSV or Excel. So it's very easy to get the information out of the system. And you can obviously, with these extracts, build a scheduled export as well. So that may be something that when we talk about using it all year round, building your monthly extract that you'll do for your ad hoc out of cycle increases pre-payroll processing.
That's great.
That's nice.
So we do have another question. I know that this handles base pay and bonus and so forth. What about equity?
Yep. So we handle LTIP schemes. So I'll just sort of log out here and I'll go back in as the manager. Sorry to jump around the views. So I'm going to show you a different review grid view. So this is for our executive team. So they have an LTIP scheme in their plan. So very similar to the review grid we were looking at before. This is where you can see we have much more complex compensation schemes. So we've got just showing the bonus portion of the grid here. So this is a plan where we've got a target bonus, we've got proration calculated throughout the plan. And then, if you want to apply deferrals to that plan, then we can manage different deferral rules. So it may be that there's forced deferral on this, or it may be just a pure stock allocation that you want to go through. So you can allocate a percentage, a monetary amount, or a stock unit amount to them. So you can have lots of different types of plans running, handling LTIP and stock allocation.
That's great. Well, Ruth, could we take a peek at the other system?
Yeah, the pay equity tool. Yeah, sure.
That'd be excellent.
So
I know that we have a lot of Colorado listeners, and this is a big thing on their mind right now.
Okay, so I'm going to just hop into that demo. So this is our pay equity solution. So a slightly different tool. It's less of a workflow tool. This is more currently designed to be an analytical platform that the reward user or the legal team in reward will work on. So they will upload data sets and they will then, go through the whole pay equity analysis process. So again, we don't have the same implementation process either because we've designed this to be as self-service as it can. So one of the first things that the users will define is, what is the data they actually want to upload to the system. So this is where you can see all the data fields. So, we'll work with our clients initially to say, what type of data do you want to do your analytics over? So this is the list of all the data fields. And you can see we've got different types of data fields. So gender is obviously a protected category. So one of the things you might, you can define what the baseline comparator group is. So typically when you're doing gender pay analysis, you compare female to male. It's not always as obvious when you're doing analysis on race and ethnicity, because you may be doing that in different, regions of the world. Typically we compare non-white with white, but if you're doing the analysis in Asia, for example, you might want to have Asian as your baseline comparator group. So it's easy for a user to set up new data fields. They can just go in and define all the settings themselves. And then there's a simple wizard that allows them to upload data sets. So we just take them through a validation process. And then, once your data set is into the system, you have various ways you can look at the data and do your analytics. So we'll start in our dashboard. So this is our sort of summary dashboard, which gives you kind of the key headlines on this particular data set.
Oh, this is great.
So this is going to show you, we're starting with average pay gaps. We're looking at the overall gender pay gap, ethnicity pay gap. You can obviously have lots of options to choose, do I want to show gender? Do I want to show ethnicity? Any protected category groups you set up will automatically show here. You can choose whether you're doing the analysis on base, bonus, or other pay. You can also filter your view on a particular part of the organization. And throughout the product, we have a kind of colored flagging system for every employee. So we'll show how they compare to a particular group. And you've got the ability to set those boundaries and how they'll appear for your organization throughout the product there.
Mm-hmm.
So through this dashboard, we show the overall pay gaps. You can then start to explore, what the experience is like through your different groups of employees in the organization. And that can be done on an intersectionality perspective by combining gender and race and other protected categories. We have various interactive charts that you can use to say, here we're looking at, for example, how gender pay gaps pay out based on your tenure. But we could equally look at that percentage by country. So let's look at how the gender pay gaps play out by each country. And that will update, but that could also be ethnicity, and you can change, how those charts are viewed, and all of those are exportable through the product. So we always kind of start our analysis looking at pay gaps. So if I go into this chart here, just get rid of tenure. This is an interactive table where you can start to narrow how you're looking at pay gaps in your organization. Typically, we'll start by looking at countries. So we can see, how the pay gap plays out within a particular country. You can see how the gender pay gap plays out across these countries. But then if you add more specificity here, so for example, if we then say, let's add job band and division, maybe you would enter location. If you had any data fields that you've loaded can easily be added to this table. Then you start to change the view into more of an equal pay comparison. So here now, for example, we're looking at all our employees in the UK who are banded S5 in operations. And we can see for that particular group, you should start to see the pay gaps in theory get less because you're comparing more similarly situated employees.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can also drill into that employee group. And you can then start to see who the employees are that fall within this group. And that colored flagging system that we showed you, you've got a count here of, based on this group, 19 employees fit within the range that you defined as acceptable. 12 are the outliers, and 14 are kind of in the sort of the edges of your acceptable boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see all who those employees are here. And then you can drill further down into any particular employee. So you can track any decisions that you make, any justifications at an employee level. So here you can, for example, flag that you've reviewed them. You can enter a justification of particularly why, their pay was a particular pay level, and you can add action points against that employee.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Now, with the ranges that you mentioned, the acceptable ranges, can you set those by standard deviations, so forth?
Yeah, so we do statistical analysis within the product as well. So we have our own proprietary regression model built in our code, and that kind of sits behind the front end of the solution. So you can create your own statistical analysis. So if I just do test, I choose the data set that I want to perform my analysis on. It will take you through a wizard to help you set up your regression analysis. So you can decide, who are you going to run this on? So potentially, actually, I'm going to keep this as running it against, the whole population, but you could narrow that down. You can choose, again, what type of pay you're going to run that against. And then if you're running a regression model and you're thinking about adjusted analysis, you want to say, what are the factors I want to test for in my model that may impact pay variance? So you can choose whether you're going to run it for gender and ethnicity, or ethnicity, whatever you've set up. And then here, any of the different factors that you choose. And it is very quick to run a statistical report. That will just kick off the R code, and then you get a summary here for this data set. It will show you your unadjusted pay gap. So we had a 33% gender pay gap originally on this data set, and that is now reduced on an adjusted basis between 21 and 13%. And for all of the factors that you've tested for, you can see here the statistical significance of those and the standard deviations that you can add in the p-values and the standard deviations as well. And we have, visual charts that will help you to understand this more. And then what we do with this is we then take this into our cohort analysis, where you can bring in the statistical outcomes to look at the employee data and the recommended pay remediation. And you can see all that standard deviation information here. So this is where you can look at each employee. You can look at what the regression model highlighted to you as potential pay remediation recommendation. And then as the user, you can go in and you can edit that. So maybe you're going to have no one can get more than a 5,000 pay equity remediation, and lots of filters and the ability to highlight individual populations in this table to build sort of different pay remediation budgets as well. There's quite a lot of detail in this product, quite hard to show in 5 minutes, but if anybody wants a more in-depth demo, then they can come back and let you know that they'd like to see more of that.
Pretty powerful tool though. Pretty
Yeah,
powerful.
that's great. Yeah, so to our listeners out there, if you'd like to learn a little bit more about these two products, please, if you're on Facebook, just leave a notes in the comments, and then we'll get you in contact with Ruth, or like I said on LinkedIn here, just you can use that polling function. So so I do have a little bit more information here about how people can contact you, Ruth. Is there anything else that you would like to, how can people find or learn more about you?
Yeah, so obviously, go to our website, curocomp.com. You'll find sort of all the information, our products and case studies. All our events are on there. So we mentioned the webinar at the end of the month. Yeah, get in touch with us there. And any questions you have on anything I've shared today, happy to share that information with you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Ruth, for your time today. It was fascinating hearing about your products and having the discussion on what's hot in 2021 as far as trends in compensation. So thank you so much for your time today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been great to chat with you guys. So
excellent. All right.
Okay. Well, we'll say goodbye then. Thanks very much then, guys. See you.
Take care.
Bye. Okay.